There is a war in American history that the United States unequivocally lost. Not a stalemate, not a political withdrawal, but a defeat so total that the U.S. government sued for peace, signed a treaty on the enemy's terms, and abandoned its forts in humiliation. This war wasn't fought in Vietnam or Afghanistan. It was fought in Wyoming and Montana, and the man who engineered this victory, the only indigenous leader to win a war against the United States, is a name most Americans have never even heard. His name was Red Cloud. And if you think you know the story of the American West, of cowboys, cavalry, and manifest destiny, you need to understand that the story you know is missing its most critical chapter. This isn't just about correcting the historical record. Understanding Red Cloud is understanding the brutal, complex, and often contradictory foundations of modern America. It's a story of resistance, brilliant strategy, and heartbreaking betrayal that reshapes everything we think we know about the so-called Indian Wars. By the end of this journey, you won't just know a new name from history. You will see the map of the United States, the treaties it signed, and the land under your feet in a completely different light. This is the story of the warrior who made a superpower bend the knee. To understand the man, you have to understand the world that created him. Maļpíya Lúta, or Red Cloud, was born around 1822, near the Platte River in what we now call Nebraska. This wasn't the United States yet. It was the Lakota world, a vast, rolling sea of grass stretching from the Missouri River to the Bighorn Mountains, an empire larger than modern-day France. This world was powered by two things, the buffalo and the horse. The horse, introduced a century earlier, had transformed the Lakota from semi-sedentary farmers into the undisputed masters of the high plains. They were a force of nature, arguably the finest light cavalry the world has ever seen. Their lives were a symphony of movement, following the immense herds of buffalo that provided everything: food, shelter, tools, clothing, and spiritual sustenance. Red Cloud was not born into chiefdom. He was born an orphan, his father dying shortly after his birth. In Lakota society, this was a severe disadvantage. Status was earned, not inherited, and without a father to guide him, his path to renown was steep. He was raised by his uncle, the chief Old Smoke, but he was always an outsider looking in. This forged in him a relentless ambition, a burning need to prove his worth through courage and cunning. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but from a young age he was the smartest. He studied the intricate politics between the different Lakota bands, the Oglala, the Brule, the Hunkpapa. He learned the ancient rivalries with the Crow, the Pawnee, and the Shoshone. War for the Lakota was a part of life. It was a way to gain horses, to protect hunting grounds, and most importantly, to earn status. A man's worth was measured in coups, acts of bravery like touching an enemy in battle without killing him. And Red Cloud, the orphan, began to collect coups with a terrifying efficiency. By the time he was a young man, he was a leader in the elite warrior society known as the Akasita, the camp police. He led war parties deep into enemy territory, fighting with a ferocity that became legendary. But unlike many of his peers, Red Cloud's ambition wasn't just for personal glory. He possessed a rare gift, foresight. He saw the world not just in terms of the next raid or the next hunt, but in decades. And he saw a new storm gathering on the eastern horizon. First, they were a trickle, strange-looking men in wagons called Wasakas by the Lakota, the white men. They followed the river, the Great Medicine Road of the Platte, on their way to a distant land they called Oregon. They were mostly a curiosity, weak, clumsy, and seemingly harmless. The Lakota and Cheyenne watched them, sometimes trading with them, sometimes raiding their livestock for an easy prize. But the trickle was becoming a stream, and the stream was becoming a flood. The year was 1849. Gold was discovered in California. Suddenly, the Oregon Trail became a highway of fortune seekers, a stampede of tens of thousands of people, wagons, and livestock, cutting a deep scar across the heart of the buffalo country. They didn't just pass through, they consumed everything in their path. They chopped down the scarce timber along the rivers for their campfires. Their oxen and cattle devoured the grass, leaving nothing for the buffalo and horse herds. They hunted for sport, often taking only the tongue of a buffalo and leaving the rest of the massive carcass to rot under the prairie sun, an act of sacrilege to the Lakota. And they brought diseases, cholera, smallpox, measles, invisible killers that swept through the camps with more devastating effect than any bullet. The United States government saw the escalating conflict and decided to intervene, not to stop their people but to protect their passage. In 1851, they called for the largest gathering of tribes in the history of the plains at Fort Laramie. Representatives from the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, and others came to parley. The government offered gifts, blankets, sugar, tools, in exchange for a promise of safe passage for the settlers and the right to build forts along the trail. To many of the chiefs, weary of the constant disruption, it seemed like a reasonable deal. They didn't fully grasp what they were signing. They had no concept of land ownership, of selling the earth. To them, the treaty was an agreement to share the road, not to surrender their world. They signed a piece of paper, took their gifts, and went home. Red Cloud was there. He was not yet a chief, just a rising warrior in his late 20s. He watched the proceedings with a deep and growing suspicion. He saw the arrogance of the American treaty commissioners. He saw the naivete of his own elders, who believed the words of men who spoke with forked tongues. He saw the blankets and bags of flour not as gifts, but as the first payment for the theft of his entire way of life. He said nothing, but he learned. He learned that the white man's words were empty, and that their hunger for land was endless. That treaty, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, was supposed to guarantee peace on the plains for 50 years. It didn't even last 3. The forts got built, the settlers kept coming, and the friction grew into fire. And then a decade later, gold was discovered again. This time it wasn't in far-off California. It was in Montana, the heart of the Rocky Mountains. To the miners and settlers in the east, this was a golden opportunity. But there was a problem. The fastest route from the Oregon Trail to the new gold fields in Bozeman, Montana, cut directly through the last, best, and most sacred hunting grounds of the Lakota and their Cheyenne allies, the Powder River Basin. This was the one place the Wasakas had not yet spoiled. It was the Lakotas' final sanctuary, their grocery store, their cathedral. A man named John Bozeman blazed a trail right through the middle of it. The Bozeman Trail. To the United States, it was a shortcut to riches. To Red Cloud, it was a dagger pointed directly at the heart of his people. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that if this road was allowed to exist, the Lakota way of life would die. Other chiefs debated, they counseled, they hoped for peace. But Red Cloud began to sharpen his knife. He would not let this happen. He would soak that ground in blood before he gave it up. The stage was set for a conflict that would pit a brilliant, determined warrior against the full might of a nation. A war that would forever be known by his name, Red Cloud's War. The American government, however, didn't see it that way. In their minds, the Fort Laramie Council of 1866 was a success. They had their treaty, signed by chiefs they recognized, men like Spotted Tail of the Brule. They saw Red Cloud as a troublemaker, a malcontent leading a rogue faction, but not a genuine threat to the United States military. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. While the treaty chiefs were led away with promises of annuities and government goods, Red Cloud was doing something far more powerful. He was uniting the people. He took a sacred war pipe and traveled through the vast, rolling country of the Powder River. He went to the camps of the Minneconjou and the Sans Arc. He met with the Northern Cheyenne, led by the stoic and respected Dull Knife. He counseled with the Arapaho. He spoke not as a chief demanding obedience, but as a warrior appealing to their shared identity, their shared sacred land. He reminded them of the broken promises, of the tide of white settlement that eroded their world piece by piece. His message was simple and electrifying. Fight now together or lose everything forever. For the first time in memory, these disparate, often rival bands and tribes found a common cause and a common leader. They put aside old grievances and pledged their warriors to Red Cloud's vision. This wasn't just a collection of raiding parties. It was the foundation of a Confederate army, a military alliance numbering in the thousands, united with a single purpose: to drive the white man from the Powder River country and burn his forts to the ground. While Red Cloud was forging this unprecedented alliance, the U.S. Army, blind to the storm gathering on the horizon, marched confidently up the Bozeman Trail. The man in command was Colonel Henry B. Carrington. Carrington was not a hardened Indian fighter. He was an administrator and engineer, a Yale graduate who had spent most of the Civil War on recruiting duty and in staff positions. He was a builder, not a killer. With nearly 700 men of the 18th Infantry, his orders were to build and garrison a string of forts to protect the trail. In July of 1866, deep in the heart of the territory Red Cloud had sworn to defend, Carrington began construction on the largest and most important of these outposts, Fort Phil Kearny. It was situated between the forks of Piney Creek, a massive stockade of pine logs, 8 feet high, enclosing a sprawling compound of barracks, storehouses, and officers' quarters. To the soldiers, it was a symbol of American power and permanence. To Red Cloud and his warriors, it was an abomination, a scar on the face of their sacred earth. And from the moment the first axe struck the first tree, the war began. It didn't start with a thundering charge or a pitched battle. It started subtly like a sickness. A soldier wandering too far for water would disappear. A teamster cutting wood would be found hours later, riddled with arrows. Horses and mules would vanish from the picket lines overnight. Small groups of warriors would appear on the bluffs overlooking the fort, just watching, a constant, unnerving presence. Red Cloud was a master of psychological warfare. He understood that he couldn't overrun a fortified position with hundreds of armed soldiers, but he could strangle it. He could cut its supply lines, harass its work parties, and bleed it man by man. He turned the vast, beautiful landscape into a prison. The soldiers inside Fort Phil Kearny were effectively under siege. Fear became a constant companion. Every trip for wood or water was a life-or-death mission. The prairie that had seemed so open and free now felt alive with hidden enemies. Colonel Carrington, cautious by nature, understood the danger. He focused on completing the fort, on building up his defenses. He drilled his men relentlessly and issued strict orders forbidding them from pursuing the elusive Lakota warriors. He knew he was outnumbered and in a hostile land, and that survival depended on discipline and defense. But not everyone in his command agreed. Among his officers was a man who was Carrington's polar opposite, Captain William J. Fetterman. Fetterman was a decorated Civil War hero, brevetted to lieutenant colonel for his bravery. He was aggressive, ambitious, and filled with a profound, almost pathological contempt for his Native American adversaries. He saw Carrington's caution as cowardice. He openly mocked the fighting ability of the Lakota and Cheyenne, calling them savages who would scatter at the first sign of a determined charge. He famously and fatefully boasted to Carrington, "Sir, with 80 men, I could ride through the whole Sioux Nation." This dangerous arrogance found a receptive audience among the younger officers and enlisted men who were frustrated by Carrington's defensive posture. They had come west to fight, to win glory, not to cower behind wooden walls. A deep and bitter rift grew within the fort's command structure, a division between Carrington's caution and Fetterman's reckless aggression. Red Cloud, observing from the hills, could not have known the details of this internal conflict, but his strategists exploited it perfectly. They began to refine a tactic that was as brilliant as it was deadly. It was a tactic that played directly into American arrogance. They would send a small party of warriors, maybe 10 or 20, to attack a woodcutting party or even ride brazenly close to the fort itself, taunting the soldiers. They would act as bait. When the soldiers, enraged and eager for a fight, would pour out of the fort in pursuit, the small decoy party would feign a panicked retreat. They would lead the pursuing soldiers on a chase, over hills and through ravines, drawing them further and further away from the safety of the fort. And then, at a place chosen in advance, the trap would be sprung. The decoys would disappear, and from every gully, from behind every ridge, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of warriors would rise up, surrounding and annihilating the hopelessly outnumbered soldiers. One of the masters of this tactic, one of the most daring decoys, was a young, quiet Oglala warrior. He was not yet a chief, but his bravery and almost mystical abilities in battle were already legendary among the people. His name was Crazy Horse. Operating as one of Red Cloud's most trusted field commanders, Crazy Horse and his hand-picked warriors were about to set a trap. As the brutal Wyoming winter of 1866 began to set in, the situation at Fort Phil Kearny grew more desperate. Supplies were low, the cold was relentless, and the attacks were constant. The tension between Carrington and Fetterman reached a breaking point. Fetterman and his clique were itching for a decisive fight, a chance to crush the savages and end the siege once and for all. They just needed the right opportunity. Red Cloud and Crazy Horse were about to give it to them. They were preparing the perfect bait for the perfect trap, one designed to exploit Fetterman's boast and turn the snow-covered hills red with blood. The date was December 21, 1866. The air was so cold it felt like breathing in shards of glass. A light snow was falling, muffling all sound and blanketing the Wyoming landscape in a deceptive peace. Hiding in the ravines and behind the low hills surrounding Fort Phil Kearny were nearly 2,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. They were a silent, invisible army, lying in wait, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They had been there for hours, enduring the punishing cold with a discipline born of desperation and a shared burning purpose. This was Red Cloud's grand design. Every warrior knew his role. Every man was a piece in a deadly game of chess, and the board was the frozen earth itself. The bait had to be perfect. It couldn't be too strong or the soldiers wouldn't chase. It couldn't be too weak, or they'd be killed before the trap was sprung. Red Cloud and the other leaders chose a small party of 10 elite warriors to act as decoys. 2 from each of the 5 bands present. A gesture of total unity. Among them was a young, relatively unknown Oglala warrior chosen for his almost supernatural bravery and skill on a horse. His name was Crazy Horse. His job was simple and yet impossibly dangerous. Get the soldiers to chase him. He had to ride close enough to the fort to be seen, provoke a fight, and then lead the soldiers over Lodge Trail Ridge and into the valley where the main force was waiting. One mistake, one stumble of his horse, and he would die, the entire plan collapsing with him. Right on schedule, a wood-gathering train lumbered out of Fort Phil Kearny. It was a routine daily task, but today it was the trigger. Shortly after the train moved out of sight of the fort's walls, the decoys struck. They swooped down on the woodcutters not to annihilate them, but to harass them, to create a crisis that the fort would have to respond to. The alarm bells rang at the fort. The wood train was under attack. Inside, Colonel Carrington began to organize a relief party. Captain William Fetterman, still brimming with contempt for his enemy, immediately demanded command. Carrington, wary of Fetterman's recklessness, hesitated. He had seen this kind of arrogance before, and he knew it got men killed. But Fetterman was a decorated Civil War veteran with powerful friends. Carrington relented, but he gave Fetterman a direct, explicit, and absolutely critical order. He looked him in the eye and said, "Support the wood train. Relieve it. But under no circumstances, I repeat, under no circumstances, are you to pursue the Indians beyond Lodge Trail Ridge." That ridge was the line of sight from the fort. Beyond it, a relief column would be on its own, blind and vulnerable. Fetterman assembled his command. 80 men in total, a mix of infantry and cavalry, including his friend Captain Frederick Brown, who had also boasted he wanted a Lakota scalp. Fetterman wasn't thinking about relieving a wood train. He was thinking about his promise to ride through the entire Sioux Nation. He saw this as his chance. He wasn't going to rescue a few woodcutters. He was going to destroy the savages who dared to challenge the United States Army. He rode out of the fort not as a rescuer, but as a hunter. As his column approached the wood train, the decoys, including Crazy Horse, broke off their attack. They presented themselves as a small fleeing band. They rode slowly, taunting the soldiers, staying just out of rifle range. Crazy Horse even dismounted at one point, pretending to fix his horse's hoof, a gesture of supreme confidence and contempt. It was more than Fetterman could stand. He saw a handful of warriors on tired ponies. He saw an easy victory. He saw glory. He completely and utterly forgot Carrington's order. He signaled the advance. Instead of escorting the wood train back to safety, he veered his entire command in pursuit of the decoys. He led them straight for Lodge Trail Ridge. Back at the fort, Carrington and the others watched in horror. They saw the column disappear over the ridge, directly into the one place he had been forbidden to go. A few minutes after they vanished from sight, the sound began. At first, it was a volley of rifle fire from Fetterman's men. A crisp, confident sound. Then a new sound rolled over the hills. A sound that chilled the blood of everyone listening at the fort. It was the sound of thousands of warriors erupting from the earth. The Lakota war cry. A terrifying, unified roar that completely drowned out the soldiers' gunfire. For Fetterman and his men, the world had turned upside down in an instant. One moment they were chasing a handful of fleeing Indians across an open ridge. The next, the ridges and valleys on all sides swarmed with warriors. They rose from the grass poured out of the ravines, a tidal wave of men and horses, armed with bows, lances, and a collection of firearms. The trap had been sprung. The decoys, their job done, melted back into the main force. The soldiers were surrounded, a tiny island of blue in a sea of furious resistance. Fetterman had led them into a perfect kill box, with no escape and no cover. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and shockingly brief. The warriors overwhelmed them with sheer numbers and ferocity. The cavalry, led by Fetterman, fell first. The infantry tried to form a defensive circle on a small hill, but it was hopeless. Arrows rained down on them in such numbers that witnesses later said it looked like a cloud had passed over the sun. In less than 30 minutes it was over. Every single one of Fetterman's 81 men was dead. It was a total and absolute annihilation. The warriors, in their fury, stripped the bodies and took the weapons, uniforms, and ammunition, precious resources for the war to come. Red Cloud had not just defeated a U.S. Army column. He had erased it from existence. It was the Army's worst defeat on the Great Plains to that date. A disaster so complete it sent shockwaves all the way to Washington, D.C. When a relief party from the fort finally reached the scene hours later, they found a vision of hell. The snow was stained crimson. The bodies of the soldiers were frozen where they fell. Fetterman, the man who boasted he could destroy the Lakota with 80 men, lay dead among his command. He had met their nation, and it had consumed him whole. The victory was a monumental moment for the Allied tribes. They had proven that by uniting, they could defeat the American military. Red Cloud's strategy of luring the arrogant into a perfectly laid trap had worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams. He was no longer just a respected war chief. He was a military genius, the leader of a successful war of resistance. The Bozeman Trail forts were now more isolated and terrified than ever. But Red Cloud knew this singular victory, as stunning as it was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of a new, more brutal chapter. He had humiliated the United States government on a national stage. He had proven their army could be beaten. And in doing so, he had poked a sleeping giant. The response from Washington would not be negotiation or retreat. It would be vengeance. The Fetterman fight had secured Red Cloud's legacy, but it had also painted a target on the back of his entire people. The news traveled east on telegraph wires, a ghost of electricity carrying a message of death. In Washington, D.C., still scarred and exhausted from its own civil war, the word of Fetterman's demise landed like a cannonball in a quiet room. 81 U.S. soldiers wiped out, not defeated but annihilated. The public, fed a steady diet of stories about manifest destiny, and the savage Indian was stunned. How could this happen? In the halls of Congress and in the saloons on the street, the debate raged. For some, it was proof that the only solution was total war, a campaign of extermination to finally solve the Indian problem. For others, weary of bloodshed, it was a sign that the current policy was a catastrophic failure. The American press, never one to miss an opportunity for sensationalism, didn't call it the Battle of the 100 Slain, as the Lakota did. They called it the Fetterman Massacre. The word itself was a weapon. A battle implies two sides fighting. A massacre implies the slaughter of innocents. The narrative was set. Captain Fetterman and his men were victims, lured into a savage trap by a cunning, bloodthirsty foe. Red Cloud, once an obscure name to most Americans, was now a household villain, the embodiment of brutal resistance to American progress. This framing was crucial. It dehumanized the Lakota and their allies, turning their brilliant tactical victory into an act of barbarism, justifying whatever was to come next. But the government was in a bind. The nation was tired of war, and its treasury was drained. Launching a full-scale winter campaign in the northern plains was a logistical nightmare and politically toxic. So they did what governments often do when faced with an impossible choice. They played for time. They launched an investigation. They formed a peace commission. The idea was to send distinguished men, generals and politicians, out west to talk, to understand, to find a peaceful solution. But their definition of peace was simple: the submission of the tribes and the opening of the Bozeman Trail. They came not to negotiate, but to dictate terms disguised as a treaty. While politicians debated in their warm offices, Red Cloud held court in the frozen expanse of the Powder River Basin. He was at the zenith of his power. The victory over Fetterman had cemented his leadership not just among his own Oglala, but across the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations. Warriors flocked to his banner. He was the man who had faced the Bluecoats and destroyed them. He controlled the entire region. The forts, Reno, Phil Kearny, and C.F. Smith, were islands of American anxiety in a sea of Lakota power. They were under a state of constant, suffocating siege. No one could leave without a heavy guard. Wood-cutting parties were ambushed. Mail carriers were picked off. The Bozeman Trail was effectively closed. When the peace commissioner sent out emissaries inviting Red Cloud to talk, his response was swift and unyielding. It was the same message he had given from the very beginning, only now it was spoken with the authority of a man who had backed his words with blood. He would not talk peace while a single soldier remained on his people's land. Abandon the forts. Get out of the Powder River country. Then, and only then, would he consider laying down his arms. There was no room for negotiation. To him, the American presence was a poison, And you don't negotiate with poison. You remove it. This absolute refusal to compromise baffled the Americans. They saw it as arrogance, as savage pride. They couldn't comprehend that for Red Cloud, it wasn't a negotiation over land use. It was a fight for the survival of his world. The U.S. Army, however, wasn't just waiting for the politicians. They were learning. Fetterman's defeat was a brutal, humiliating lesson, and they studied it intensely. Their key takeaway wasn't about strategy or leadership. It was about technology. The soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny had been armed primarily with Civil War-era Springfield muzzle-loading rifle muskets. A good soldier could fire maybe 3 rounds a minute. And to reload, he had to stand up, exposing himself, pouring powder, ramming a ball down the barrel. A slow, clumsy process in the heat of battle. The warriors, armed with bows and arrows, could fire a dozen arrows in the time it took to reload once. The Army's answer was the Springfield Model 1866, a conversion of the old muzzleloaders into a breech-loading rifle. It was nicknamed the trapdoor for its hinged breech block that flipped open to accept a metallic cartridge. This was more than an upgrade, it was a revolution. A soldier could now lie flat on the ground, protected, and fire up to 12 rounds a minute. A small, disciplined group of men could now generate a volume of fire previously unimaginable. The equation of combat had been fundamentally altered, and in the summer of 1867, this new equation would be put to the test. On August 1st, near Fort C.F. Smith, a group of soldiers and civilian contractors were cutting hay when they were attacked by hundreds of Cheyenne and Lakota warriors. The men scrambled for cover behind a makeshift corral, and for hours, they held off charge after charge with their new breech-loading rifles. The next day, 80 miles to the south, the main event took place. A crew of woodcutters and their 32-man Army escort were working several miles from Fort Phil Kearny. Their only defense was an oval corral they had made from 14 wooden wagon boxes, the wheels removed, laid end to end. It was a flimsy-looking fortress. That morning, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of warriors under the leadership of men like Crazy Horse and American Horse descended upon them. The warriors were confident. This was Fetterman all over again. A small, isolated group of soldiers ripe for the taking. They began with probing attacks, trying to draw the soldiers out, just as they had with Fetterman. But the commander, Captain James Powell, was no Fetterman. He had learned the lesson. He ordered his men to hold their fire, to stay inside the wagon box corral. The warriors, growing impatient, prepared for a final, overwhelming charge. They swept down from the surrounding hills in a massive wave, a sight meant to cause sheer terror and break the spirit of any man. But inside the corral, the soldiers were ready. They had stacked crates of ammunition. They had loaded extra rifles and laid them out. As the wave of warriors crashed toward them, Captain Powell gave the order to fire. What happened next was a scene from a nightmare for the Lakota. Instead of the expected single volley, followed by a frantic reloading period, the wagon boxes erupted in a continuous, deafening roar of gunfire. The new trapdoor Springfield spat lead with a speed and ferocity the warriors had never encountered. Their mass charge, the tactic that had been so devastatingly effective against Fetterman, was now a death sentence. Horses and riders were torn apart, falling in heaps before they could even get close. The sheer volume of fire was incomprehensible. It was like charging into a giant invisible meat grinder. They pulled back, regrouped and charged again. And again. For over 4 hours they threw themselves at that tiny circle of wagons. They tried crawling through the grass, using decoys, attacking from all sides. But nothing worked. The 32 men inside the corral maintained their discipline, their rifles growing hot from the constant firing, creating a nearly impenetrable wall of bullets. By the afternoon, when a relief column from Fort Phil Kearny finally arrived, the warriors melted back into the hills, leaving behind scores of their dead and wounded. Inside the corral, only 3 soldiers had been killed. The wagon box fight was not a major strategic victory for the U.S. Army. The Lakota still controlled the land, but its psychological impact was profound. It was a terrifying glimpse into the future. Red Cloud and his warriors had proven they were masters of strategy and courage. But the wagon box fight proved that courage could be rendered meaningless by a simple piece of machinery. You couldn't outsmart a bullet. You couldn't overwhelm a rate of fire that was 10 times your own. A new, terrifying variable had been introduced into their struggle. The Americans could lose men, they could lose battles, but they could also invent new ways to kill faster and more efficiently than ever before. Red Cloud still held the Powder River country, but the ground beneath his feet was beginning to shake. The war was far from over, but its nature had just changed forever. With the surrender of Robert E. Lee at Appomattox, the great grinding machinery of the American Civil War shuddered to a halt. A generation of young men, forged in the crucible of places like Gettysburg and Antietam, had become experts in the art of war. Now hundreds of thousands of them were unemployed, their skills suddenly obsolete in a nation desperate for peace. But the United States government had a new purpose for them, a new frontier, a new enemy. The full, undivided attention of the most powerful military on the continent was about to turn west, and it would be aimed directly at the heart of the Powder River country. The pressure didn't just come from the army, it came from the insatiable hunger for gold. Rumors of rich strikes in the mountains of Montana had ignited a new fever, and a shortcut was needed. A trail blazed by a man named John Bozeman, which sliced directly through the last great hunting grounds of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. To the tribes, this land wasn't a shortcut. It was their grocery store, their cathedral, their entire way of life. The buffalo herds that sustained them followed ancient paths through these valleys. To build a road here, to lead wagons and soldiers and settlers through its heart, was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war. The government, however, preferred to begin with the pretense of peace. In the summer of 1866, they called for a great council at Fort Laramie. They invited the most powerful leaders of the plains to discuss the opening of the Bozeman Trail. They promised gifts, annuities, and guaranteed protection for the tribes who would sign their treaty. Many chiefs, weary of war and seeing the endless tide of white settlement as inevitable, were willing to listen. Spotted Tail of the Brule and Dull Knife of the Cheyenne argued for peace. They believed a deal, however unfavorable, was better than annihilation. Red Cloud came to listen, but he did not come to surrender. He arrived at Fort Laramie not as a supplicant, but as the most powerful man in the region, the undisputed leader of a confederacy that could put thousands of warriors in the field. He was skeptical, his eyes missing nothing. He listened to the speeches of the peace commissioners, their words dripping with promises of friendship and mutual respect. He heard them talk of a road for the white man to pass through, assuring the chiefs that they only wanted passage, not the land itself. And then in the middle of the negotiations, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It grew larger, resolving itself into a column of over 700 blue-coated United States infantrymen, marching with purpose, their supply wagons rumbling behind them. They were led by a colonel named Henry B. Carrington. Carrington was not a hardened Indian fighter. He was an engineer, a Yale graduate, a man tasked not with fighting a war, but with building the infrastructure for one. His orders were to march up the Bozeman Trail and construct a chain of forts to protect the travelers, whether the Lakota agreed to it or not. The arrival of Carrington's command during a supposed peace talk was the ultimate act of bad faith. It was a clear, undeniable signal that the treaty was a sham. The decision had already been made in Washington. The words spoken at Laramie were nothing more than a smokescreen. The council erupted. The chiefs who had argued for peace were humiliated, their credibility shattered. All eyes turned to Red Cloud. He stood, his powerful frame radiating fury. He strode to the center of the council and pointed a finger directly at Colonel Carrington. His voice, a low rumble of thunder, silenced the entire gathering. He spoke not to the commissioners, but to the man who embodied the Army's treachery. "The Great Father sends us presents and desires a new road," he boomed. His words translated for the stunned American delegation. "But the white chief goes with soldiers to steal that road before the Indians say yes or no. You are the white eagle who has come to steal our land." He recounted the long history of broken promises, of treaties signed and then ignored, of Lakota land whittled away piece by piece. He declared that the Powder River was their last refuge, the one place they could not surrender. He would not touch the white man's pen. He would not accept their tainted gifts. He turned to his fellow chiefs and warriors. "Hear ye, Dakotas," he cried. "When the Great Father keeps but one promise, we will trust him to keep another. But he has kept none. He is sending his soldiers to steal our land. We must fight." With that, Red Cloud, along with Man Afraid of His Horses and the other Oglala and Cheyenne war leaders, turned their backs on the council. They gathered their people, kicked dirt on the treaty goods and rode north. The war was on. Red Cloud's war. Colonel Carrington, undeterred, marched his men out of Fort Laramie and into the heart of the territory Red Cloud had just vowed to defend. He was an organizer, not a warrior, and his first priority was construction. He reinforced Fort Reno and then pushed deeper. establishing his main headquarters at a site on the Piney Creek. He called it Fort Phil Kearny. It was a massive undertaking, an 8-acre stockade built from over 4,000 logs, deep in hostile territory, 100 miles from the nearest semblance of safety. From the moment the first axe struck the first tree, Red Cloud's warriors were there. This was not the open field, set-piece warfare of the Civil War. This was something else entirely. Red Cloud was a master of psychological and asymmetrical warfare. He knew he couldn't overrun a fortified position defended by artillery, so he chose not to. Instead, he laid siege to the American mind. His warriors were ghosts. They materialized on the ridges, watched the soldiers, and then vanished. They never offered a major battle. Instead, they bled the garrison day by day, cut by cut. The most vital and dangerous job at Fort Phil Kearny was cutting wood. The fort and its firewood supply required a constant stream of timber from a logging camp several miles away. Every wood-cutting party that left the fort's walls was a target. Warriors would swarm the wagon trains, driving off livestock, picking off soldiers who strayed too far, and then melting back into the hills before a proper response could be mounted. Travel on the Bozeman Trail ground to a halt. No wagon train could pass without a heavy military escort, and even then they were relentlessly harassed. The mail carriers became moving targets. The telegraph lines that were supposed to connect the forts were cut as quickly as they were strung. Inside Fort Phil Kearny, a sense of profound isolation and paranoia began to set in. The soldiers were prisoners in their own fortress. The vast, beautiful landscape of Wyoming became a terrifying maze of unseen threats. Red Cloud controlled everything outside the stockade walls. Carrington, the cautious engineer, understood the danger. He doubled the guards, issued strict orders against pursuing raiding parties, and focused on completing his fortifications. He knew he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, but his caution was seen as cowardice by some of his own officers, men who were veterans of the Civil War and who held a deep racist contempt for their Native American adversaries. The most vocal of these men was Captain William Jed Fetterman. Fetterman was the archetypal glory hound. He was brave, ambitious, and utterly dismissive of the Lakota and Cheyenne. He saw them as primitives who would scatter at the first sign of a determined charge. He openly mocked Carrington's defensive posture and bragged to anyone who would listen about what he would do if given command. He believed the only reason the war hadn't been won was because of cowardly leadership. His famous boast echoed through the barracks of the fort, a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and ignorance. "Give me 80 men," Fetterman declared, "and I can ride through the entire Sioux Nation." Winter was now closing in on the high plains, burying the world in snow and ice. The Lakota did not typically wage war in the deep of winter, but Red Cloud was not a typical leader. He was tightening the noose around Fort Phil Kearny, waiting for the perfect moment to strike a decisive blow. And inside the fort, an arrogant captain with 80 men in mind was about to give him the exact opportunity he was waiting for. His name was Captain William J. Fetterman, a Civil War veteran with a decorated record. He arrived at Fort Phil Kearny with a deep-seated contempt for his new enemy. He saw the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho not as skilled warriors defending their homeland, but as undisciplined savages who would break and run at the first sign of organized military power. He was famously quoted as saying, "Give me 80 men, and I could ride through the entire Sioux Nation." It was a boast born of pure, unadulterated hubris, a fatal underestimation of the man who was watching his every move from the surrounding hills. Fetterman saw the constant harassment of the forts with trains not as a sign of strategic genius, but as a minor nuisance. He lobbied his commanding officer, Colonel Henry Carrington, for a more aggressive approach. He wanted to ride out, meet the warriors in the open field, and deliver a punishing blow that would end their resistance for good. Carrington, a more cautious man who understood the precariousness of their position, repeatedly denied his requests, ordering only small, defensive skirmishes. But Fetterman's arrogance was a virus, infecting the other officers and enlisted men who were tired of being cooped up in the fort, feeling like prey. The tension inside the log walls was becoming unbearable. Red Cloud knew this. He could feel it. His strategy wasn't just about cutting supply lines, it was psychological. Every raid, every stolen horse, every arrow fired at a sentry was designed to fray the nerves of the soldiers, to stoke their frustration and, most importantly, to feed the arrogance of men like Fetterman. He was baiting a trap, and he needed the perfect lure. For this, he turned to a group of his most daring and brilliant warriors. Among them, a young Oglala Lakota who was already building a legendary reputation for his almost supernatural bravery. His name was Crazy Horse. They were the decoys. Their mission was one of incredible risk. They had to ride close enough to the fort to provoke a response, engage the soldiers, and then execute a feigned, panicked retreat, drawing the pursuing column into a prearranged kill zone. Everything depended on their skill and their nerve. If they retreated too fast, the soldiers wouldn't follow. If they were too slow, they would be overrun and killed. On the bitterly cold morning of December 21, 1866, the plan was set in motion. A wood train, essential for firewood to fight off the brutal Wyoming winter, rumbled out of the fort. As if on cue, Red Cloud's decoys, including Crazy Horse, swept down from the hills. They attacked the wood train with ferocity, creating chaos and forcing it to circle its wagons. The alarm sounded at the fort. This was the moment Fetterman had been waiting for. He demanded that Carrington give him command of a relief force. He wanted to ride out and crush this latest attack once and for all. Carrington, weary and perhaps pressured by the other officers, finally relented. He authorized a force of 80 men, a mix of infantry and cavalry, including Fetterman's desired 80. But he gave Fetterman one single explicit order. It was an order that would echo through history. He told him, "Relieve the wood train, but under no circumstances are you to pursue the hostiles beyond Lodge Trail Ridge." Lodge Trail Ridge was a high crest of land that blocked the fort's view of the valley beyond. Carrington knew that whatever was over that ridge was unknown, and he feared an ambush. Fetterman assembled his command. It was a confident group, armed with the latest Springfield breech-loading rifles. They even brought along two civilians, James Wheatley and Isaac Fisher, who were eager to kill some Indians and armed with new powerful Henry repeating rifles. Fetterman rode out of the fort, not towards the besieged wood train, but straight towards the decoys, who were taunting him from a nearby hill. He had no intention of simply relieving the wood train. He was going hunting. He was going to make good on his boast. The decoys played their part to perfection. They fired a few shots, yelled insults, and then turned their ponies and fled, making it look like a disorganized retreat. Fetterman took the bait. He ordered his men to charge, his blood up, the thrill of the chase consuming him. He completely ignored the wood train, which was now forgotten. His eyes were fixed on the fleeing warriors. Colonel Carrington stood on the sentry walk of the fort, watching through a spyglass. He saw Fetterman's command thunder past the wood train. He saw them chase the small band of warriors towards Lodge Trail Ridge. And he felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He had given a direct order. An order to not cross that ridge. But Fetterman was a man possessed by his own ego, riding headlong towards his destiny. The decoys were masters of their craft. They would slow down, letting the soldiers get tantalizingly close, then urge their ponies on again, always staying just out of effective rifle range. Crazy Horse was said to have dismounted several times, pretending to adjust his horse's hoof, a display of incredible calm and courage designed to infuriate and embolden his pursuers. The chase went on, up the slope of the ridge. Fetterman's men were strung out, the cavalry in the lead, the infantrymen struggling to keep up in the thin, frigid air. They were being pulled further and further from the safety of the fort, deeper into Red Cloud's territory. Then they reached the crest of Lodge Trail Ridge. Before them lay the valley of Pinot Creek. The decoys scattered and disappeared into the brush. For a moment there was silence. Fetterman had violated his orders. He had crossed the ridge. He looked down into the seemingly empty valley, perhaps feeling a surge of triumph, believing he had chased the enemy off. He was wrong. He was fatally wrong. A signal was given, and then the world erupted. From the gullies, from behind the hills, from the tall grass, an army materialized. It was an avalanche of warriors. Over 1,500 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho rose up as one, screaming their war cries. Red Cloud had sprung his trap. The soldiers were stunned. The sheer number of warriors was overwhelming, a living, breathing tidal wave of men and horses bent on their destruction. Panic set in. Fetterman's command was no longer a disciplined military unit. It was 80 terrified men, miles from help, completely surrounded, and hopelessly outnumbered nearly 20 to 1. The fight was a whirlwind of brutal close-quarters combat. It was over in less than 30 minutes. The warriors, many armed only with bows, lances, and war clubs, swarmed the soldiers. The new Springfield rifles the soldiers carried were powerful, but they were single-shot. After firing, a soldier was vulnerable for the precious seconds it took to eject the spent cartridge and reload. The warriors exploited this ruthlessly. They would draw a soldier's fire and then charge him before he could chamber another round. The two civilians with their Henry repeating rifles put up a desperate fight from a cluster of rocks, but they too were eventually overwhelmed. Fetterman and his men were annihilated. Not a single soldier, not a single man from his command survived. It was the U.S. Army's worst defeat on the Great Plains up to that point, a disaster on a scale they had never imagined possible. Back at Fort Phil Kearny, Carrington and the remaining garrison heard the sudden, deafening roar of gunfire from over the ridge, followed by an even more terrifying silence. A relief party was sent out, led by a captain who had wisely refused to join Fetterman earlier. What they found was a scene of utter carnage. The bodies of all 81 men lay stripped and mutilated in the frozen landscape, a grim testament to the fury of the warriors they had so arrogantly underestimated. This was Red Cloud's masterpiece. It was a perfectly planned, perfectly executed military operation that cemented his legend. The Fetterman fight, as it became known, sent a shockwave across the United States. The public was horrified. The government was humiliated. A brash captain's boast had been answered in blood, and a Lakota war chief had just proven to the world that he was a military strategist of the highest order. The war was far from over, but Red Cloud had won its most decisive battle. He had closed his fist around the Bozeman Trail, and now Washington had no choice but to listen. And listen they did. The news of the Fetterman fight hit the East Coast like a thunderclap of shock and humiliation. One officer and 80 men, wiped out to the last soul. In the parlors of Boston and the halls of Congress, it wasn't just a defeat. It was a national scandal. The newspapers, hungry for a sensational story, called it a massacre. They painted pictures of savage brutality, but beneath the outrage was a deep, unsettling fear. An army that had just crushed the Confederacy, that had mastered the art of industrial warfare, had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and annihilated by a Lakota war chief they had barely heard of. The United States was wounded not just in its military but in its very sense of self, its belief in manifest destiny. General William Tecumseh Sherman, a man who knew a thing or two about total war, fumed. He wanted to respond with overwhelming force, to wage a winter campaign that would crush the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho once and for all. But the country was tired. The Civil War had bled it dry of men, money, and the will to fight. Sending thousands more troops into the frozen, unforgiving plains of the Powder River country to chase a ghost army led by a strategic genius was a political and logistical nightmare. And so, Washington found itself in an impossible position. To fight was to risk another, even greater Fetterman-style disaster. To do nothing was to admit defeat, to concede that a savage had brought the world's mightiest new power to its knees. A bitter debate raged. The hawks screamed for vengeance, for extermination. But a new voice was rising in the East, the voice of the peace men. These were reformers, humanitarians, and pragmatists who argued that the war was unjust, unwinnable, and ruinously expensive. They argued that the Native Americans were only defending their own land, a right any American could understand. While the politicians debated, Red Cloud held the whip hand. He and his warriors had effectively sealed off the Bozeman Trail. No wagon train could pass. The three forts, Reno, Phil Kearny, and C.F. Smith, were islands of blue in a vast hostile sea of red. They were prisons for their own garrisons. Soldiers couldn't even venture out to gather firewood without risking their lives. Red Cloud's warriors were everywhere and nowhere, a constant, menacing presence that wore down the morale of the isolated troops. He didn't need to launch another grand attack. He was winning through a masterful war of attrition. He was starving the forts out, strangling the American presence in his country. Finally, the peacemen won the argument in Washington. The government formed an official Indian Peace Commission, a group of generals and civilians tasked with finding a diplomatic solution. In the spring of 1867, they sent runners into the Powder River country, carrying messages of peace and invitations to a great council at Fort Laramie. They offered gifts, annuities, and promises of a new way forward. Many chiefs, weary of the constant conflict, were tempted. They saw the long-term reality. The railroads were coming, the buffalo were thinning, and the white man's numbers were endless. Perhaps peace, even a compromised peace, was better than a war of annihilation. But Red Cloud was not among them. He was a realist, not a romantic. He had seen American promises before. He knew they were as fleeting as the summer dust. When the peace commissioners invited him to talk, his response was simple, direct, and utterly uncompromising. He sent a message back that stunned the American officials with its sheer audacity. He would not come to Fort Laramie. He would not talk peace. He would not even consider a ceasefire until every single soldier had been withdrawn from the Powder River country and the forts along the Bozeman Trail were abandoned and burned to the ground. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Red Cloud was not asking for peace. He was dictating the terms of his victory. The commissioners were aghast. Who was this arrogant chief to make demands of the United States government? But Red Cloud understood power. He knew that as long as the forts remained, they were a dagger pointed at the heart of his people's land. Any treaty signed while those forts stood would be signed under duress, a temporary truce until the Americans were strong enough to strike again. He demanded proof, not promises. The soldiers had to leave first. Then and only then would he talk. The standoff lasted for more than a year. It was a tense, dangerous period, a chessboard of bluffs and threats. While the diplomats argued, the warriors still fought. In the summer of 1867, the Lakota and Cheyenne tested the American defenses in two key battles, the Hayfield Fight and the Wagon Box Fight. In both instances, they mounted massive attacks against small, heavily outnumbered groups of soldiers and civilians. But something had changed. The soldiers were no longer armed with slow-loading muzzle loaders. They now carried new rapid-fire Springfield breech-loading rifles. At the Wagon Box Fight, just 6 miles from Fort Phil Kearny, 32 American soldiers and woodcutters held off an estimated 1,000 warriors for hours, firing from behind a makeshift corral of wagon beds. The new rifles were devastating, capable of firing 10 to 20 times faster than the old ones. The warriors, attacking with incredible bravery, were cut down in waves. They had never faced such a sustained and lethal volume of fire. These battles were tactical defeats for the warriors, but they were strategic victories for Red Cloud. They proved his point perfectly. While he could dominate the open plains, a direct assault on a fortified position armed with modern weaponry was suicide. It reinforced the wisdom of his larger strategy. Bleed the Americans through guerrilla warfare and political pressure. Don't break his army against their strongest points. The cost in lives was simply too high. The Wagon Box Fight also sent a chilling message to Washington. Yes, they had superior firepower, but what did it prove? That 32 men could barely survive an attack? It showed that to truly pacify the region, they would need tens of thousands of soldiers, all armed with the newest rifles, in a permanent state of high alert. The costs would be astronomical. It was cheaper to just give Red Cloud what he wanted. And so, after months of stalemate, of failed attempts to lure Red Cloud to the negotiating table, the United States government blinked. In the spring of 1868, the Peace Commission returned to Fort Laramie. This time they came bearing not just promises, but a concession that was almost unthinkable. They agreed to Red Cloud's terms. General Sherman himself, the great hardliner, sent the order. The forts along the Bozeman Trail, the very reason the war had started, were to be abandoned. It was a victory of staggering proportions. Red Cloud had won his war. He had done what no other Native American leader had ever done. He had fought the United States Army to a standstill and forced it into a full-scale retreat. He didn't even go to Fort Laramie to watch the other chiefs sign the treaty in the spring. He said he would wait. He needed to see it with his own eyes. And so he waited. Through the summer of 1868, he watched from the hills as the unthinkable happened. He saw the columns of blue-coated soldiers marching south, out of his country. He saw the wagon trains hauling away the cannons and supplies. He saw the gates of Fort C.F. Smith and Fort Phil Kearny swing open for the last time. And then, to make sure the white man could never return, his warriors, with his blessing, rode down from the hills and set the hated forts to the torch, burning them to ashes until nothing remained but blackened timber and smoke rising into the vast Wyoming sky. Only then, with the last soldier gone and the last fort destroyed, did Red Cloud ride south toward Fort Laramie. He had won the war. Now he would dictate the peace. The arrival of Red Cloud at Fort Laramie in the fall of 1868 was not the arrival of a defeated chief coming to beg for terms. It was the arrival of a conquering general. American peace commissioners, men used to dictating treaties from a position of absolute power, now sat across from a man who had brought the United States Army to its knees. He had not just won battles, he had won the war. And he carried that victory not with arrogance, but with the immense, unshakable gravity of a man who had paid for it in blood and sacrifice. The negotiations were tense, a clash of two worlds trying to find a common language on a piece of paper. The Americans saw the treaty as a way to end the bloodshed and clear the way for the railroad. For Red Cloud, it was about one thing: the land. The Powder River country, the sacred hunting grounds his people had fought and died for, had to be theirs, exclusively and forever. He refused to touch the pen, refused to make his mark, until he had confirmation from his own warriors that every last soldier had abandoned the forts along the Bozeman Trail. He trusted his own eyes, not the promises of the Great Father in Washington. Finally, on November 6, 1868, with the forts confirmed to be nothing but ash, Red Cloud signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie. On paper, it was one of the most stunning victories ever achieved by a Native American nation against the United States. It established the Great Sioux Reservation, a vast territory encompassing all of modern-day South Dakota west of the Missouri River. Crucially, it also designated the Powder River country as unceded Indian territory. American citizens were forbidden from settling in, or even passing through, this land without the tribe's consent. The United States government, the rapidly expanding industrial power, had legally drawn a line in the sand and promised not to cross it. Red Cloud had won everything he had fought for. The war was over. The peace was secure. Or so it seemed. But even in this moment of triumph, the seeds of future conflict were being sown. The treaty was a document of compromise, and for many Lakota, compromise was just a slower form of surrender. Leaders like Sitting Bull of the Hunkpapa and a rising, formidable Oglala warrior named Crazy Horse refused to come in. They looked at the treaty and saw not a promise but a cage. They saw the clauses about accepting government rations, about sending their children to white schools, about settling near government agencies, and they recognized the poison hidden within the honeyed words. They believed Red Cloud, in his desire for peace, had taken the first step down a path that would lead to the end of their way of life. They chose to remain in the unceded territory, free and defiant, viewing their kinsman Red Cloud with a growing suspicion. The Great Lakota alliance that had won the war was already beginning to fracture over how to live with the peace. Red Cloud, however, believed he was playing the long game. He saw the endless waves of settlers, the unstoppable power of the railroad. He knew that fighting forever was impossible. He believed the treaty was a shield, a legal barrier that would protect his people and their land, allowing them to adapt on their own terms. To ensure this peace held, he embarked on a journey that was in many ways more dangerous and disorienting than any battle he had ever fought. In 1870, at the invitation of the U.S. government, Red Cloud and a delegation of Lakota leaders traveled to Washington, D.C. Imagine this man, who had lived his entire life under the vast, open sky of the plains, being put on a train. The iron horse that he had fought to keep out of his lands now carried him east, through a world he could barely comprehend. He saw not just towns, but cities teeming with more people than he had ever imagined existed. He saw factories belching smoke, buildings that scraped the clouds, a relentless, churning world of noise and industry. He was seeing the source of the flood he had spent years trying to hold back. It was a sobering, overwhelming vision of the power he was up against. The sheer numbers of the white man were a weapon in themselves, a demographic tide that could not be defeated with arrows or rifles. When he finally arrived in Washington, he was treated as a celebrity. He was a curiosity, the noble savage who had bested the army. He was paraded before politicians and dignitaries, his stoic, powerful presence a source of fascination. He met with President Ulysses S. Grant, the great general of the Civil War. It was in these meetings that the true, devastating nature of the American government's strategy was revealed. As interpreters read the official version of the 1868 treaty aloud, Red Cloud's calm demeanor began to crack. The words he heard were not the words he had agreed to. The treaty he had signed at Fort Laramie was a warrior's treaty, about boundaries and territory. The treaty they read to him in Washington was a bureaucrat's treaty, about assimilation and dependence. A critical clause had been altered. Where Red Cloud understood he had agreed to trade near the Missouri River, the document stated the Lakota must live there, at a government agency, and give up their nomadic hunting life to become farmers on land ill-suited for it. It was a lie, a deliberate deception woven into the very fabric of the document that was meant to guarantee peace. His victory, won at such a high cost, felt like it was turning to dust in his hands. The war on the plains had ended, but a new war, a war of paper and ink and twisted words, had just begun. Red Cloud was furious. He felt the betrayal like a physical blow. He was a warrior, a chief, a man whose word was his bond, and he had been tricked like a child. But he was not just a warrior. He was a statesman. He knew that raging against the president in the White House would achieve nothing. He needed a different weapon. He found it in New York City. At the invitation of reformers at the Cooper Union, Red Cloud stood before a packed hall of 1,000 of New York's most influential citizens. He was not wearing the buckskin and feathers they expected. He wore a simple black suit, a conscious choice to meet them on their own terms. And then he spoke. Through an interpreter, his voice filled the hall, not with anger, but with a powerful, irrefutable logic and a deep, aching sense of justice. "We came to talk with our great father," he said. "And I want to know now, in the presence of all these people, who is it that has been telling lies?" He laid out the promises that were made and the promises that were broken. He spoke of his people's desire to live in peace, but not as prisoners. "I have been and am a friend of the white man," he declared. "But the white men have not been friends to me." He wasn't begging for pity. He was demanding that America live up to its own ideals, its own laws, its own treaties. The crowd was mesmerized. They had come to see a relic, a warrior chief from a dying world. Instead, they found a brilliant orator, a diplomat of incredible skill, a leader pleading a just and righteous case for his people. He received a thunderous standing ovation. The press championed his cause. For a moment, Red Cloud had captured the heart of the American East. He had outmaneuvered the politicians and generals once again, this time not with a cavalry charge, but with the simple, undeniable power of the truth. He returned west with a revised understanding from the government, a promise that his people would not be forced to the Missouri River. He had won another victory, this time in the heart of the enemy city. But as the iron horse carried him back toward the plains, a question must have burned in his mind. How long would this new promise last? And what would be the cost of his newfound fame among his own people, who still saw the treaty, and the man who signed it with suspicious eyes? The fame he found in the East was a currency that held little value in the West. Back in the Powder River country, among the lodges of his own people, the stories he told of the white man's world sounded like fables. Cities with more people than all the buffalo on the plains? Iron horses that screamed across the land? To warriors who measured strength in horses stolen and coups counted. These tales sounded like the ramblings of a man whose spirit had been captured. The fine clothes and gifts he brought back were not seen as tokens of respect, but as the price of his loyalty. Whispers followed him like his own shadow. Had the great warrior who closed the Bozeman Trail been tamed by a soft bed and a full stomach? This suspicion curdled into outright anger when the government's next betrayal became clear. Red Cloud had staked his reputation on the promise of an agency on the North Platte River, in their traditional hunting grounds. It was the one concession he had wrestled from the commissioners, a foothold in their old world. But the government delayed, and then, citing logistical issues, they tried to place the agency on the Missouri River, a place the Lakota despised, a place of sickness, traitors, and enemies. Red Cloud was incensed. He had traveled 1,000 miles and shaken the White Father's hand, only to be made a liar in front of his own people. He refused. For 2 years he fought this new kind of war, a war of telegrams and petitions, a war against an enemy he couldn't see or strike. He was no longer battling soldiers, he was battling bureaucracy, and it was a far more slippery foe. While Red Cloud argued with agents and officials, the heart of the Lakota resistance beat stronger and wilder far out on the plains. Two names now rose to eclipse his own among those who refused to yield: Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. They saw Red Cloud's path not as a strategy for survival, but as a slow, managed death. Sitting Bull, the powerful Hunkpapa spiritual leader, was an anchor of tradition. He believed that to take the white man's food was to give up one's soul. He declared he would live and die a Lakota, free on the land the Creator had given them. He would not touch a pen. He would not sign a treaty. His defiance was absolute. And then there was Crazy Horse. Younger, mystical, a warrior of unparalleled genius and quiet intensity. He was the living embodiment of the free Lakota spirit. While Red Cloud negotiated in stuffy rooms, Crazy Horse was leading raids, living as his father and grandfather had. He saw the reservation as a cage, and Red Cloud as the man holding the key. For Crazy Horse and his followers, there was no compromise. To them, Red Cloud's peace looked a lot like surrender. The Lakota Nation was fracturing, splitting into two camps: the agency Indians who followed Red Cloud, Spotted Tail, and other leaders to the ration houses, and the hostiles who followed Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse into the last untamed wilderness. It was a division that cut through families, a wound in the heart of the people. In 1873, after a bitter struggle, a compromise was reached. The Red Cloud Agency was finally established in northwestern Nebraska, near the White River. It wasn't the Platte, but it was better than the Missouri. Yet, life at the agency was a constant humiliation. The promised supplies were often late, rotten, or stolen by corrupt agents who grew rich off Lakota misery. The people were forced to line up for handouts of beef and flour, a profound indignity for a proud nation of hunters. Disease, unknown on the open plains, swept through the crowded camps. Red Cloud found himself in an impossible position. He spent his days fighting with the agent for the food and rights his people were promised, trying to hold his fragile community together. He was a chief, but he felt like a beggar. Every failure, every late shipment, every act of government deceit was used as ammunition by the hostile camps. "See," their messengers would say, "this is Red Cloud's peace. He starves you with a white man's hand." Red Cloud knew that total war was suicide. He had seen their numbers. He understood their industrial power. He was playing the long game, trying to preserve the Lakota people themselves, even if it meant sacrificing their way of life. But his people were warriors, not farmers. They were a people of the buffalo, not the ration ticket. And there was one place, one piece of land, that embodied their spirit more than any other. The Pahasapa, the Black Hills. This was not just land. It was their church, their pharmacy, the birthplace of their creation stories. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the very treaty Red Cloud had been so reluctant to sign, explicitly guaranteed that the Black Hills would belong to the Lakota forever. No white person or persons shall be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of the territory, the treaty read, or without the consent of the Indians to pass through the same. Forever, it turned out, was a very short time. Rumors had swirled for years about gold in the hills, whispers that drove a fever in the hearts of prospectors. In the summer of 1874, the United States government shattered its own treaty. Under the command of a flamboyant, glory-seeking lieutenant colonel named George Armstrong Custer, the 7th Cavalry marched directly into the heart of the Black Hills, a clear and deliberate violation of the law. Their mission was officially a reconnaissance survey, but everyone knew the real purpose. Custer's dispatches, telegraphed to the nation, confirmed the rumors in the most sensational way possible. There was gold, he claimed, from the grassroots down. The news hit the nation like a lightning strike. A financial panic had crippled the country the year before, and the promise of a new gold rush was an irresistible siren song. A flood of miners, trespassers, and fortune-seekers began to pour into the sacred hills, ignoring the treaty, ignoring the soldiers who were supposed to stop them, and ignoring the Lakota warnings. For Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, this was the final unforgivable betrayal. The white man's words were smoke. Their treaties were lies. There was nothing left to negotiate. The government had proven that the only thing it respected was force. For Red Cloud, it was the catastrophic failure of his entire strategy. He had traded war for a promise, and that promise was now being washed away by a tide of gold-hungry invaders. The path of peace had led to the desecration of their most sacred ground. The stage was now set for the last great Indian war on the northern plains, a conflict that would pit Custer's ambition against the unbending will of Sitting Bull and the warrior genius of Crazy Horse. And Red Cloud, the man who had tried to walk the impossible line between two worlds, could now only watch as the fire he had tried so desperately to extinguish was about to erupt into an uncontrollable inferno. The year 1876 would become the stuff of American legend, but for the Lakota, it was a year of desperate, brilliant, and ultimately tragic defiance. As thousands of warriors flocked to the call of Sitting Bull, Red Cloud remained at his agency, a chief in name but a hostage in reality. He had seen the endless cities of the East. He had counted the soldiers in the factories. He knew this was a war that could not be won, no matter how many battles were. Every victory, he understood, would only tighten the noose. When news of the stunning victory at the Little Bighorn reached him, of Custer and his entire command wiped out, there was no celebration in Red Cloud's heart. He knew what was coming next. He knew that the white man's hero, the son of the morning star, had not just been defeated, he had been made a martyr. And America would demand a terrible vengeance for its fallen icon. And that vengeance came swiftly and without mercy. The U.S. government, humiliated and enraged, unleashed a winter campaign of total war. Soldiers weren't just fighting warriors anymore. They were destroying villages, food supplies, and pony herds, breaking the very ability of the Lakota to live off the land. Congress passed the Sell or Starve Act. The ultimatum was simple and brutal. Sign away the Black Hills, your most sacred land, or your government rations will be cut off. For a people already confined and dependent, it was a choice between spiritual death and physical starvation. Red Cloud, along with other agency chiefs, was forced to sign the Treaty of 1876, surrendering the Pahasapa, the land he had fought so hard to protect, the land guaranteed to his people forever, was gone with the stroke of a pen, taken not on the battlefield, but at the tip of a bayonet and the edge of a starvation order. The final blow to the heart of the resistance came in the spring of 1877. Crazy Horse, the untamable spirit of the Lakota, the ghost who moved unseen through the battlefield, was starving. His people were freezing and desperate. He finally agreed to come into the agency, led to believe he would be given a reservation of his own in the north. Red Cloud helped negotiate the surrender, hoping to save the life of the great warrior, a man he deeply respected. But it was a trap. The Army's fear of Crazy Horse was too great. Just a few months later at Fort Robinson, under the pretense of a council, soldiers tried to force him into a jail cell. When he resisted, a soldier thrust a bayonet into his back. The greatest warrior the plains had ever known died on the cold, hard ground of a fort he had entered under a flag of truce. His death signaled the end. The war was over. The long walk of the Lakota people into the bleak world of the reservation had begun. But for Red Cloud, the fight was not over. It simply changed form. The battlefield was no longer the Powder River country. It was now the dusty confines of the Pine Ridge Agency. The enemy was no longer a blue-coated soldier. It was the corrupt Indian agent, the duplicitous politician, the soul-crushing bureaucracy of the federal government. For the next 30 years, Red Cloud waged a new kind of war. A war of attrition fought with words, letters, and relentless political pressure. He became a master of the system he so despised, using it to fight for the rights of his people. He exposed corrupt agents who stole rations and annuity goods, getting them fired. He traveled again to Washington, D.C., not as a warrior, but as a statesman, arguing tirelessly for the government to honor its broken promises. He fiercely opposed the Dawes Act of 1887, a policy designed to destroy the Lakota way of life by breaking up their communal lands into individual plots, a concept utterly alien to his people. He called it the Thief Road, a way to steal what little land they had left. He was a constant, infuriating thorn in the side of the establishment, a man they could not control, silence, or ignore. As the 19th century drew to its bloody close, a new wave of desperation swept across the reservations. The bison were gone, the old ways were dying, and the promises of the white man were dust. Out of this despair rose a spiritual movement called the Ghost Dance. A Paiute prophet named Wovoka had a vision. If the people danced, lived in peace, and returned to their traditions, the white man would disappear, the buffalo would return, and their dead ancestors would come back to life. It was a message of hope in a hopeless time, and it spread like wildfire across the plains. Red Cloud, now old and nearly blind, was wary. He had seen too many false hopes turn to ash, but he also understood the deep spiritual hunger of his people. He did not participate, but he did not stop the dance. He allowed it. The American authorities, however, saw the ghost dance not as a prayer, but as a prelude to war. Panic seized the settlements and the agencies. The army was called in. On December 29, 1890, the 7th Cavalry, Custer's old regiment, surrounded a band of Minneconjou Lakota under Chief Spotted Elk near Wounded Knee Creek. The people were sick, cold, and traveling to Pine Ridge to seek Red Cloud's protection. The soldiers demanded they surrender their weapons. A single shot rang out, no one knows from where, and the soldiers opened fire with rifles and Hotchkiss guns, weapons of industrial slaughter. They tore through the camp, killing men, women, and children indiscriminately. When the shooting stopped, nearly 300 Lakota lay dead or dying in the snow, their bodies frozen in grotesque shapes by a blizzard that followed. The Wounded Knee Massacre wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. It was the final brutal punctuation mark on 400 years of conflict. The dream of the ghost dance died in that bloody snow, and with it, the last vestiges of Lakota armed resistance. Red Cloud lived for another 19 years, a man of the 19th century marooned in the 20th. He had been born in a world where the Lakota were the undisputed masters of the northern plains, and he died in a world of automobiles and telegraphs, his people confined to one of the poorest counties in the United States. In his final years, he dictated his life story, a powerful and poignant account of a world that had vanished. He passed away on December 10, 1909, at the age of 87, and was buried on a hill overlooking the Pine Ridge Agency, the final battleground of his long and arduous life. So what is the legacy of Maļpíya Lúta, Red Cloud? It is as complex and contradictory as the man himself. He was a visionary warrior who led his people to their greatest military victory over the United States, forcing a superpower to sue for peace. He was also a pragmatic diplomat who recognized the futility of endless war and chose the bitter path of negotiation to save his people from annihilation. Some would later criticize him for signing treaties, for living on the reservation, for not dying in a blaze of glory like Crazy Horse. But Red Cloud's fight was for survival. His goal was not a beautiful death. It was a future for his children and his grandchildren. He fought with rifles and lances when he could win, and when he couldn't, he fought with petitions and protests. He fought to the very end. His life is a testament to the impossible choices faced by leaders in times of overwhelming crisis. He was a patriot who watched his nation be dismantled piece by piece, and who dedicated his entire existence to slowing that destruction. The story of Red Cloud is not just the story of a great Lakota chief. It is a fundamental American story. It's a story about treaties made and treaties broken. It's a story about the clash of civilizations and the tragic cost of empire. It reminds us that history is never simple, heroes are rarely perfect, and the ground beneath our feet holds stories of struggle, sacrifice, and resilience that we have a duty to remember. In one of his most famous quotes, Red Cloud looked back on his life and the endless stream of deception he had faced. He said, "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land and they took it." His story is a chilling echo of that broken promise, but it is also a powerful anthem of a leader who, against all odds, never, ever stopped fighting for his people.